I knew the axe was swinging before I even set foot in the glass-walled conference room. After 27 years of cleaning up other people's financial messes, you develop a sixth sense for corporate executions. It is a very specific smell, a mix of stale boardroom coffee, cheap cologne, and the distinct scent of executive panic. Julian Vance, our brand new chief financial officer, sat at the head of the mahogany table. He was grinning like he had just personally invented the wheel, wearing a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my first pickup truck. Julian was the kind of guy whose resume was a collection of corporate buzzwords. He had zero practical understanding of tax law, but he was great at nodding during board meetings and talking about synergy. He did not even look me in the eye when I walked in. He was too busy scrolling on his phone, probably liking posts about the hustle lifestyle or checking the latest virtual currency trends. "Take a seat, Carl," Julian said without looking up. The disrespect was thick enough to choke on. I pulled out a leather chair and sat down. It let out a long, exhausted sigh that matched my internal state. I am 52 years old, and I have spent the better part of my adult life managing the books for this corporation. I have seen founders come and go, survived 3 major market crashes, and quietly buried more executive mistakes than I care to remember. I deserved better than a dismissal from a kid who looked like he still got an allowance from his parents. "We have been looking at the numbers." Carl, Julian started, finally looking at me. His eyes were cold, like a salesman who had already decided you could not afford what he was selling. "The old way of doing things is antiquated. It is heavy. We need agility in our financial operations. We need synergy." I did not blink. I just stared at the bridge of his nose. It is a forensic auditing trick. If you look at the bridge of someone's nose, they think you are staring into their soul, and it makes them incredibly uncomfortable. Pivoting, Julian continued, flashing a blindingly white smile. "We are moving the entire accounting department to a third-party logistical firm. We are outsourcing, Carl. It is the future. It is leaner, faster, and significantly cheaper." He slid a single sheet of paper across the polished table. It was not a severance agreement. It was a termination notice, effective immediately. "Pack your trash, Carl," he smirked. That was the line. That was the exact moment the universe decided Julian needed to learn a very painful lesson about corporate gravity. "We are outsourcing accounting," he repeated, looking pleased with himself. "Security will escort you out in 20 minutes. I did not yell. I did not throw the heavy glass ashtray at his teeth, though the calculations were already running in my head. I just looked at the paper. Then I looked at him. He had absolutely no idea what he had just done. Julian was so busy playing golf with the board of directors and ordering custom business cards that he had completely ignored the mail that actually mattered. Specifically, he had ignored the official letter from the Internal Revenue Service. It was a notice of a full-scope, deep-dive forensic audit covering the last 7 years of our corporate operations. It was a $480 million inquiry. The federal agents were scheduled to arrive next Tuesday at 9 o'clock in the morning. And guess who was the only designated contact point? Guess who was the only person in this entire concrete building who knew where the digital ledgers were stored and how to read them? "Me. Is that all?" I asked. My voice was flat, steady, like a dial tone. Julian looked disappointed. He wanted a scene. He wanted the middle-aged man to beg for his pension, to weep about his mortgage, to ask how he was going to survive. He wanted to feel like a conqueror. "That is all," Julian said, waving a hand dismissively. "Leave your laptop and your security badge on the desk." I stood up. My knees made a popping sound that felt loud in the quiet room. I smoothed my trousers. I did not mention the audit. I did not mention that the logistical firm he had hired in some basement across the country did not know a standard accounting principle from a hole in the ground. I did not mention that without my help, the company was about to walk face first into a federal buzzsaw. "Good luck, Julian," I said. It was not a friendly wish. It was a quiet curse. I walked out of the conference room. The main office was buzzing with the usual noise. Phones ringing, copier machines jamming, and dozens of people pretending to be productive. I walked past the break room where the coffee pot had been burning the leftovers since 6 o'clock this morning. I went to my desk. I did not pack trash. I packed my favorite ceramic mug, which had a sarcastic joke about tax audits printed on the side. I packed my lucky calculator, an old gray tool that had survived 3 corporate mergers, and a single red folder from my drawer. The folder did not contain company files. It contained my personal notes, my legal research, and my documentation of compliance. It was my insurance policy. Julian watched me from his glass office, arms crossed, looking like the king of a very small, very unstable hill. He thought he had trimmed the fat. He did not realize he had just cut the brake lines on the company vehicle while we were parked on a steep hill. I took the elevator down to the lobby. The security guard, an old veteran named Jerry, looked at my small cardboard box. "Leaving early today, Carl?" Jerry asked. "I am retiring, Jerry," I said, pulling my sunglasses out of my pocket. Effective immediately. I walked out into the parking lot. The heat off the asphalt hit me like a physical blow. I threw my box into the passenger seat of my old Ford truck. I sat there for a minute, gripping the steering wheel, breathing in the smell of hot vinyl and old dust. I lit a cigarette. I had quit smoking 5 years ago, but I kept a fresh pack in the glove box for emergencies. This counted as an emergency. Not for me, of course. For them. Tuesday was 4 days away. I turned the key and the engine roared to life. I backed out of my spot and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. The bridge behind me was not just burning. I had rigged it with dynamite, and Julian had just lit the match. You have to understand something about corporate accounting. Most people think it is just simple math. They think it is just adding up columns on a spreadsheet and making sure the numbers balance. If only it were that simple. In my world, accounting is the art of translation. It is translating chaos into compliance, and sometimes it is making sure the numbers do not land the chief executive officer in a federal penitentiary. For over 2 decades, I was not just the guy who managed the general ledger. I was the cleanup crew. When the market took a massive dive in 2008, the previous chief financial officer panicked. He wanted to quietly liquidate a portion of the employee pension fund to cover a bad margin call he had made on a personal bet with company capital. I was the one who physically stood in front of the server room door to block him. I stayed in the office for 72 hours straight, surviving on stale vending machine crackers and pure adrenaline to restructure our corporate debt so we did not have to lay off 3,000 factory workers. I saved the company, and in return, I received a plastic trophy and a pat on the back. Then there was the chief executive officer's messy divorce in 2015. Lawrence Croft, our esteemed leader, had been quietly funneling corporate assets into a shell company in the Cayman Islands to hide them from his wife's forensic attorneys. I discovered the discrepancy within 10 minutes of reviewing the quarterly reports. Instead of running to the board, I went straight to Lawrence. I explained to him that his little offshore venture was a direct breach of fiduciary duty and a violation of federal tax regulations. I buried the mistake, forced him to return the capital, and restructure the transaction so it was entirely legal and compliant. I saved him from a public scandal and potential jail time. And what did I get for my loyalty? A 2% cost of living adjustment and a memo from Human Resources complaining that I was using too much color ink in the department printer. People like Julian Vance only see the finished product. They see the glossy annual reports with the stock photos of smiling employees. They do not see the duct tape and structural support holding the entire building together. They do not see me at 3 o'clock in the morning, my eyes bloodshot from staring at tiny cells in a ledger, finding a single misplaced decimal point that would have cost the company $6 million in federal penalties. They thought I was just a relic from the past. They laughed because I preferred paper files over their modern chat software. But I had a good reason for that. I do not put records of sensitive transactions in a searchable digital database. Paper can be shredded. Paper does not leave a digital metadata trail that can be subpoenaed by a federal prosecutor. I was operating on a level of legal caution that these young consultants could not even comprehend. When Julian decided to outsource our department, he did not just fire me. He fired our entire team of 10 experienced staff members, effective immediately with 0 notice. That was not just cold, it was flat out illegal. Under Title 29 of the United States Code, Section 2101, commonly known as the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, employers are legally required to provide 60 days advance notice for mass layoffs. Firing us on the spot was a blatant violation of federal law, exposing the company to massive statutory damages and civil penalties. On top of that, Julian's failure to review the pending audit notice and his decision to terminate the primary custodian of the financial records was a clear breach of his fiduciary duty to the shareholders. He was putting the entire company in extreme legal jeopardy just to make his quarterly budget look slightly better. I drove home, with the windows down, feeling the warm wind. My property is located on a quiet acre outside of town. The backyard is filled with aggressively maintained prickly pear cactus and thorny rose bushes. It is hostile vegetation, and I like it because it keeps unwanted visitors at a distance. I poured myself a glass of iced tea with a healthy pour of bourbon and sat on the back porch. I thought about the encryption protocols. These IRS agents coming next week were not the friendly local agents who help you with your personal return. They were forensic investigators. They wear dark suits and carry leather briefcases full of federal subpoenas. They do not accept excuses. They want cold, hard documentation. For the last 6 months, I had been building our audit defense. I had organized every receipt, justified every write-off, and cross-referenced every ledger entry with our corporate bank accounts. It was a masterpiece of compliance, but it was entirely encrypted on a secure partition of our server. To access it, you needed a 24-character password that existed only in my head, and a physical token key that was currently sitting on my kitchen counter next to my car keys. Julian had confiscated my work laptop, but he did not even know the token key existed. He thought everything was stored in the cloud. He honestly believed you could just search for financial files like you search for a movie on a streaming service. I took a sip of my drink and smiled. The irony was beautiful. If Julian had treated me with even a shred of professional decency, I would have walked him through the transition. I would have handed him the keys and explained the filing system. I am a professional, and I take pride in my work. But he chose to throw me out like garbage. Now, he was going to have to explain corporate synergy to a team of federal auditors who only cared about the missing documentation. According to Brenda in our payroll department, the circus arrived about an hour after I left the building. Brenda is a good friend who has worked with me for 15 years. She spends her breaks behind the warehouse building and knows every piece of gossip before it even happens. She was my eyes and ears inside the office. The replacement team was from a high-end consulting firm called Stratosphere Solutions. Brenda described them as a group of young kids in matching gray suits, wearing loafers with no socks, and carrying expensive tablets. The lead consultant was a young guy named Brody, who looked like he had never seen a tax form in his entire life. They marched into our quiet accounting bullpen, like they were conquering heroes arriving to save the natives. Julian gathered the remaining staff for a quick meeting. He actually stood on a chair in the middle of the room to announce the new era of the company. He introduced Brody and his team as the architects of our financial future. I almost laughed out loud when Brenda texted me that phrase. The architects. These kids could not even reconcile a petty cash drawer, let alone build a defense against a federal forensic audit. Brody immediately asked for the transition files, the standard operating procedures, and the map of our digital archives. Julian walked him over to my empty desk. The mahogany surface was completely clean. There were no sticky notes, no files, only a faint dust outline where my lucky calculator had sat for the last 20 years. Julian opened the drawers. The top drawer was empty. The middle drawer was empty. The deep bottom drawer, where I kept the historical folders, was also empty. But I did have a small parting gift for them. In the center of the desk, I had left a single printed sheet of paper. It was a picture of that cartoon dog sitting in a room full of flames, smiling and saying, "This is fine." Underneath the picture, I had typed 2 words, "Good luck." Brenda said Julian's face turned the color of a ripe plum. He crumpled the paper in his fist and threw it into the trash can. "It does not matter," Julian shouted to the room. "Everything is on the server anyway." He marched down to the basement to find Zach, our head of information technology. Zach is a guy who lives in the server room, wears heavy metal band shirts, and has been with the company longer than anyone else. Zach also detested Julian. The new chief financial officer had slashed the IT budget by 40% the previous month to fund the installation of a premium espresso bar in the executive suite. When Julian demanded that Zach grant the consultants access to my encrypted folders, Zach did not even look up from his screen. He took a slow sip of his soda, typed a few commands with one hand, and told Julian that he had submitted a work ticket. The standard turnaround time for network access requests was 24 to 48 hours. Even if Zach had fast-tracked the request, it would not have helped them. The audit preparation files, the variance reports, and the historical records were all stored on the secure Z drive partition. I had created that partition 5 years ago to protect our proprietary data. It was protected by military-grade encryption that required a 24-character password and the physical security key that was currently sitting on my kitchen counter. The consultants spent the rest of Friday afternoon staring at error messages on their screens. Access denied, permission required, contact your system administrator. They were locked out of the castle and the keys were 20 miles away. I spent Friday evening doing something I had not done in years. I relaxed. I did not log into my work account. I did not review the weekly cash flow. I made a large beef casserole with extra cheese and sat down to watch a television documentary about historical mysteries. My personal phone buzzed several times. I saw Julian's name flash on the screen. "Carl, we need the password for the Z drive immediately." "Urgent," the text read. I took a bite of my dinner and blocked the number. A few minutes later, another message arrived from an unknown number. It was Brody. "Hi, Carl. So excited to build on your legacy here. Just need a quick hand with the encryption keys." "Thanks," the message said. I blocked that number too. I was not being difficult. I was simply following Julian's instructions. He had told me to pack my trash and leave. I was gone. I was no longer an employee. I was just a private citizen enjoying a quiet evening. The weekend passed slowly and peacefully. On Saturday morning, I was out in my garden by 7 o'clock. Pruning roses is a lot like auditing. You have to be patient, you have to be precise, and you have to cut away the dead wood so the healthy parts can grow. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, leaned over the wooden fence. She is 80 years old, wears neon tracksuits, and has a habit of speaking her mind. "You look relaxed, Carl," she called out. "Did you finally quit that terrible job?" "I got outsourced, Mrs. Gable," I said, shaking the dirt from my gardening gloves. "Good," she said, lighting a cigarette. "They did not deserve you anyway. Go pour yourself a drink." I did just that. Later that afternoon, I logged onto my personal computer. There was a notification from the Internal Revenue Service in my inbox. It was the automated confirmation for the Tuesday morning audit. The email list showed my personal address as the primary point of contact. The federal government did not care about Julian's new synergy. To them, the appointment was set, and the documentation was expected at 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning. I marked the email as read and moved it to a folder I had created specifically for this occasion. The folder was titled, "Not My Job. Monday was a holiday for the banks, but the corporate office was open, and I knew the atmosphere there was absolute panic." Brenda was sending me updates throughout the day. The consultants were desperately printing out raw ledger reports, trying to piece together a financial narrative for the last 7 years. But they were looking at numbers without context. For instance, they found a recurring payment of $40,000 every month to an entity named Environmental Services Group. The transactions had been made for 3 years, starting in 2018. Without the secure documents, the consultants had no idea why those payments had been made. To an outside auditor, it looked like a massive kickback scheme or a series of unauthorized bribes. But I had the physical documentation in my red folder. Those payments were actually the retainer fees for a specialized cleanup crew that had handled an accidental chemical leak at our secondary warehouse. I had personally supervised the remediation process to ensure we were in full compliance with state and federal regulations, and I had labeled the fees as consulting to prevent triggering a false alarm with the Environmental Protection Agency. Without my files, the company could not prove the legitimacy of those transactions, which meant they were looking at massive environmental fines and potential tax evasion charges. I went to bed early on Monday night and slept like a baby. I woke up at 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning, made a pot of coffee, and sat at my kitchen counter in my robe. At 9 o'clock sharp, I looked at the microwave clock. Showtime, I muttered. 20 miles away, two black sedans pulled into the visitor spaces at corporate headquarters. A team of 4 federal agents in dark suits got out of the vehicles, carrying heavy leather briefcases. They did not look like they were there to negotiate. According to Brenda, Chloe, our receptionist, almost fainted when they walked in and demanded to see the chief financial officer. At 9 o'clock and 5 minutes, my phone began to vibrate on the counter. It was Julian. I let it ring. At 9 o'clock and 7 minutes, he called again. I declined the call. At 9 o'clock and 9 minutes, a third call came from his mobile number. I ignored it and took a sip of my coffee. At 9 o'clock and 11 minutes, the phone rang again, but this time it was an official government number with a Washington area code. I swiped the screen and answered. "Hello," a dry official voice said. "Am I speaking with Carl Henderson, the designated financial officer for the corporation?" "This is Carl," I said, using my most polite, helpful tone. "How can I help you today?" "Mr. Henderson, this is Agent Fletcher with the Internal Revenue Service," the man said. "We are currently at your corporate headquarters for the scheduled field audit. We have been informed by the staff that you are no longer with the company." "That is correct, Agent Fletcher," I replied, looking out the window at my garden. "I was terminated last Friday. The new management decided to outsource the entire accounting department effective immediately. I am currently retired." There was long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the rustle of papers. "Terminated," Agent Fletcher repeated, his voice dropping a register. "You were dismissed 3 business days before a scheduled $480 million federal audit?" "Yes, sir," I said. Julian Vance, the new chief financial officer, felt that outsourcing would bring more synergy to our operations. I am sure he is fully prepared to assist you with your questions. "Mr. Henderson, the gentleman in question is currently unable to provide the encryption keys for the digital ledgers," Agent Fletcher said. "He claims you have them." I laughed softly. "Agent Fletcher, those keys are security tokens for our encrypted Z drive. As the record custodian, I could not simply leave military-grade encryption keys sitting on an empty desk where unauthorized personnel could access them. That would be a major security violation. I took them with me to ensure data integrity. I am happy to return them through a proper offboarding protocol. But I was escorted from the building by security guards in 20 minutes and did not have the opportunity." "I see," Agent Fletcher said. I could hear a faint, grim amusement in his voice. He had seen this kind of corporate stupidity before. "And you are currently at your private residence?" "I am," I said. "Very well, Mr. Henderson. Please keep your line open." I hung up and smiled. The panic at the office must have been spectacular. Our chief executive officer, Lawrence Croft, was actually in the building that morning. He usually spent his time on his yacht or attending conferences in Aspen, but he had stayed in town for the audit. When he discovered that the IRS agents were sitting in the conference room with no files to review, he went ballistic. Brenda messaged me from the supply closet where she was hiding. "Lawrence is screaming," the text read. "He looks like he is going to have a heart attack. He is yelling at—" Julian Agent Fletcher had walked out of the conference room and demanded to see the signatory authority of the corporation, which was Lawrence. He informed the CEO that the primary contact officer had been fired and the files were encrypted, meaning the company was currently non-compliant with the audit request. Every hour of delay would result in statutory penalties. "Where are the keys?" Lawrence had roared. "Carl has them," Julian had whispered. "Then go get them!" Lawrence screamed. "Take the agents with you if you must. Drag him back here or get those keys, or do not bother coming back at all." Brenda's final text arrived a minute later. "They are coming to your house. Julian, Lawrence, and the IRS agents. You have about 20 minutes." I stood up, walked to the hall mirror, and adjusted my robe. I went to the kitchen, turned on the kettle, and prepared a plate of cheese and crackers. If they wanted to bring the circus to my front yard, the least I could do was enjoy the show. My driveway is a modest gravel strip, not designed for an executive convoy. So when the cars began to arrive, it was quite a sight. First came Julian's leased sedan, screeching around the bend like a getaway car. Next was Lawrence's massive luxury vehicle, which took up the entire width of the narrow street. Finally, the unmarked black sedan carrying the federal agents parked quietly near the curb. I watched through the front window blinds. Mrs. Gable was already on her front porch, holding binoculars in one hand and a cigarette in the other. She looked over at me and gave me a thumbs up. Julian got out of his car first. He looked like he had been dragged through a swamp. His tie was loosened, his hair was messy, and he had large sweat stains under his arms. Lawrence emerged next, his face a deep shade of red, shouting into his phone before slamming it shut. The federal agents got out last, looking calm and carrying their clipboards. They walked up my front path, past the sharp, prickly pear cacti. Julian knocked loudly on the screen door. "Carl, open the door. It is Julian," he called out. I took a slow sip of my tea, waited 10 seconds, and then opened the main wooden door. I stood behind the locked screen door, wearing my silk robe. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" I asked. "If you are selling something, I have a sign on the post." "Carl, cut the nonsense," Lawrence snapped, pushing past Julian. "We need those encryption keys immediately. The audit is starting, and we cannot access the files." I looked past him to Agent Fletcher, who was standing on the lawn examining my rose bushes. He caught my eye and nodded. I nodded back. "The encryption keys," I murmured. "I am no longer an employee of the company, Lawrence. Fulfilling corporate requests without being on the payroll could be seen as an unauthorized access issue. Furthermore, we need to talk about how my termination was handled." "What do you mean by that?" Julian stammered. "I am talking about the fact that you fired our entire department of 10 people with zero notice," I said, looking directly at Julian. "That is a clear violation of Title 29, United States Code, Section 2101, the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. The company is facing massive statutory damages and civil lawsuits for that little stunt. Not to mention, your failure to address a federal audit and your decision to fire the record custodian is a direct breach of your fiduciary duty to the corporation." Lawrence turned his head slowly to glare at Julian, who looked like he wanted to sink into the gravel. "We can settle all of that later," Lawrence said, turning back to me. "Just give us the keys." "I can hand over the physical token key, Lawrence," I said, "but the key only unlocks the server partition. It does not tell you where the files are, how the accounts are structured, or how to explain the variance reports. Only I know the mapping of those files. If I just give you the key, Brody and his consultants will be staring at raw data they do not understand, and Agent Fletcher will have a field day with your tax records." Lawrence gritted his teeth. He knew I was right. "What do you want, Carl?" "I do not want a job," I said. "I am retired. But if you want me to act as an independent consultant to represent the company during this audit, my hourly rate is $15,000, Julian gasped. "15,000? That is highway robbery." "No, Julian," I said. "That is the market rate for saving the company from a $480 million disaster. And there is a 6-hour minimum, payable up front via direct wire transfer, before I set foot off this porch." Lawrence stared at me. He was calculating the cost. $90,000 against the potential loss of hundreds of millions of dollars in federal penalties and corporate ruin. "Give me your routing information." Lawrence growled, pulling out his phone. I recited the numbers. Lawrence tapped furiously on his screen. Within 2 minutes, my personal phone buzzed. I checked the screen. A pending deposit of $90,000 had cleared in my account. "Give me 5 minutes to get dressed," I said. "And Julian, do not touch my cactus." I closed the door, went to my bedroom, and put on my finest navy blue power suit. I grabbed the physical token key, my USB drive, and my favorite ceramic mug. When I walked back outside, I got into my Ford truck and started the engine. I followed their luxury cars back to the headquarters. When we walked onto the accounting floor, the consultants looked at me as if I were a miracle worker. I sat down at my old desk, plugged in the token key, and typed the 24-character password. The system hummed to life. The audit lasted 3 days. I sat in the conference room with Agent Fletcher, presenting the organized schedules, the expense receipts, and the full documentation for the chemical leak payments. I explained every variance and justified every deduction. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Agent Fletcher closed his briefcase. "Everything is in order, Mr. Henderson," he said, shaking my hand. "We will be issuing a no-change letter. The books are immaculate." He turned to Lawrence and Julian, who were waiting by the door. "You gentlemen are incredibly lucky," Agent Fletcher added. "The only reason your company is not facing severe federal charges is because this man built a bulletproof vest out of financial records and wrapped you in it." Lawrence nodded slowly. He looked at Julian. "Julian," Lawrence said, his voice cold, "pack your trash. You are terminated, effective immediately." Julian looked stunned, but he did not say a word. He quietly walked out of the room. Lawrence turned to me. "Carl, come back. We will make you the chief financial officer. Double your old salary." I picked up my coffee mug and smiled. "No thank you, Lawrence. I am done cleaning up corporate messes. I am a full-time consultant now. If you ever need my services again, you know my rate. It is $15,000 an hour. That was 3 months ago. I used the money from my consulting fee to buy a brand new truck. I started a small consulting firm called The Cleaner, and I only work 10 hours a week, mostly helping small business owners navigate their own audits. I heard the corporation is struggling to find a replacement, and Lawrence has called me twice this week. I let it go to voicemail. Sometimes, I sit on my porch with a glass of iced tea and watch the sun go down. I heard Julian is trying to make a living online talking about virtual finance. I wish him luck. He is going to need it. So that is the story of how a simple termination notice turned into a very comfortable retirement fund. Never underestimate the person who knows the passwords, and never ask an accountant to pack their trash, because we might just take the dumpster with us.